we're going to get straight to the federal implications of things before we talk state politics. I mean, you must just be sitting there looking at this thinking this is New South Wales writ large.
Well, it is bizarre, and it is what Anna Bligh described as the New South Wales disease. I think Labor has got themselves in a pretty pickle. If they change leaders, it confirms that it's all about them, not about the public. It's all about the factions. If they don't change leaders, there are clearly people in that caucus who won't be led. So I don't think that there's an easy solution here for Labor. But certainly, as far as the public's concerned, once again we've got confirmed that the biggest threat to this country is not the economic situation, it's not the job situation, it's the instability within the ALP.
You're going to be able to give us some pretty frank assessments, though, on this, because, you know, you're in a different tier of government. Even though you're on the opposite side to these guys, you won't need to be quite as spin-orientated on this as your federal colleagues will be, I suspect, in the next 48 hours. But if you had to walk through a door and your life depended on it, who would you prefer to face off as if you were Tony Abbott right now? Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard? And I know that you might say both are as tainted as each other, but if you had to choose, who would you rather take on at an election?
Well, I actually think Tony's in a pretty good position, because there's no doubt that his resurgence and his coalescing of the Liberal National parties federally was one of the factors that saw Rudd out the door. So Tony has strength there, and certainly his campaign since the last federal election against Julia Gillard has paid off as well. So,
but if you had to pick one, which would it be?
Well, I think Tony's in a situation where it doesn't matter, in the same sense that I didn't think Nathan Rees would go. Christina Keneally came in, I was told she couldn't be beaten, and ultimately you just stick to your knitting and you get there.
OK, but who can he beat by more then? I want you to pick one. Which one would it be? Well, would you rather take on Kevin Rudd, or would you rather take on Julia Gillard?
I think in a funny sort of way, Tony would like to take on Kevin Rudd, because that's who he thought he was going to take on in his first election in the first place.
Let's put yourself back in your own shoes.
Thank you.
And you may be facing either or in the coming months. Who would you prefer to work with? Who would you think would be in a position to give you a better deal for New South Wales, particularly on funding issues and things like that, because you haven't had much luck with Julia Gillard?
And I think the fact we haven't had much luck is more about the hung parliament, more about the lack of a Prime Minister's authority in a parliament where you don't have a solid majority. So I think some of the individual ministers have had too much of a say. But I have to say there is a disconnect here. In private, at COAG, Julia Gillard is everything she's not seen to be publicly. Hard working across the issues, smart, a hard negotiator. So, you know, I have an enormous amount of respect for the way in which she conducts her job. But the bad news for her is that her party and the antics of her party is not allowing that to be seen by the electorate.
What about Kevin Rudd? Have you met him privately?
I haven't had a 90-minute conversation with Kevin. He certainly hasn't confirmed to me that he's about to mount a leadership challenge.
You haven't been sworn at?
Well, look, you know, we're all human, Peter. I'm sure even journalists occasionally get frustrated. But look, you know, I've had a little bit to do with Kevin Rudd, but only at social events. I was with him at the 4th anniversary of the apology to the stolen generation at Government House a couple of weeks ago. You know, he's got some issues upon which he's absolutely in tune with the Australian public, but his party made a decision about who the leader is. His party now has to decide what the best way forward is.
But just going back to the realities that may face Tony Abbott as well, if there is a change of leadership, is it a case of sort of be careful what you wish for the Liberals now? I mean, they've been pushing this for so long. I think there's a suspicion now amongst some of them that they may have pushed it too far. Kevin Rudd will certainly change the dynamic. A lot of them would probably prefer to have Julia Gillard up against them for as long as they possibly can.
Well, you know, I went through a session of Parliament, term of Parliament, where we had 3 different Labor leaders. Each time the leadership changed, I was told as an opposition leader that I would find it harder, that I wouldn't get there. And what you do is you adapt and you keep going towards those issues that you think are important. Tony Abbott is the most disciplined politician in this country. He's also shown himself to be one of the most adept, and I wouldn't write him off against any Labor leader, whether those two or whether Bill Shorten or someone else.
But you'd have to be thinking that in terms of your own position as New South Wales Premier, dealing with the federal government, it's been remarkably combative for me to watch it as a commentator since you've been in. It's almost a year now. The federal government have not, in a sense, put the olive branch out to you in a way that I thought that they might, to try to sort of get past some of these problems that they've had federally. I would think that Kevin Rudd would change that. I think that he would act towards your government perhaps more like he acted in the first half of his time dealing with Colin Barnett before the mining tax came in.
I think that's a bit unfair to Julia Gillard, because whether it's the health agreement that was certainly an issue in the state campaign election, We negotiated with the Prime Minister, with other states, I think a deal that delivers better outcomes to people across the state. We stood beside each other at the Conservatorium High School a month ago announcing additional funding for students with disability across New South Wales as part of a new national partnership. We can work together, but as I've said to the Prime Minister and joked with the Prime Minister, she'll get used to me. When it comes to issues like carbon tax and the like, I'll go hell for leather against policies I think are bad, but I'm happy to cooperate with whoever's Prime Minister on issues that will benefit New South Wales.
Premier, I want to ask some very Sydney-based issues. Sydney has some quite significant problems at the moment. Affordability, housing affordability being one. I'm a Melburnian, as you know. I can buy a 3-bedroom brick veneer home in Werribee, 30 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD, for $300,000. If I come to Sydney, I think the equivalent property in, say, Kellyville, 45 kilometres from the CBD, is about $400,000 to $450,000. Why does it cost so much to buy a house in Sydney, and how do we manage this going forward?
Partly, I think, because of a failure to release land in a timely fashion. So Victoria, and Melbourne in particular, has been very good at having a longer-term housing strategy, not only for infill housing but also for housing on the outskirts. Secondly, it's got a far simpler planning system. And thirdly, whilst it can levy infrastructure charges against property, it hasn't done so. So part of our system is that we haven't had any sort of system. Land release has been all over the place. Infill has allegedly come with no cost, so no investment in infrastructure. We've had a planning system that's opaque at best, and we've had infrastructure levies that have almost priced people out of the market, both for industrial and also residential land.
I agree with that approach. What Sydney needs, in my view, is a Werribee. The western suburbs and northern suburbs have large amounts of developable residential land. Where is Sydney's Werribee that's going to deliver all of this affordable housing?
Well, the southwest and the northwest are the two areas that were designated a decade ago, and what Brad Hazzard, who's our planning minister, is focused on is trying to get as many of those parcels of land to market as possible. That also matches, and you say Werribee, it matches the fact that we've got rail lines either being built or about to be built to both areas to provide them with the infrastructure they need. So the plans are there. The frustration I have is that so little of the planning had been done before the election, and people like Gladys Berejiklian, our Transport Minister, Brad Hazzard, are getting on with the job.
There's some really big picture strategic issues with regard to Sydney. Sydney's about 4.5 million people at the moment. By mid-century, it will be 6 to 7 million people. Another 2 million people added to Sydney. Sydney has not added a dam since 1978. I'm not sure when the last power station was built. Sydney will need a second airport by the middle of the century. Shouldn't we be making these strategic decisions now to deliver the infrastructure, the big picture infrastructure that this city will require over the next 30 years?
Absolutely, and that's why one of the lessons we took out of the last 10 years of government is that you can't leave that to the politicians, because we'll always do the short-term, not the long-term decisions. So we've established infrastructure in New South Wales to put in place a 20-year infrastructure strategy across the board, not just water, not just electricity and the like, but roads, all those things that we need, port infrastructure and the like, which is all about trying to fashion our future. We've made decisions about electricity generators to essentially privatise the generation. That's in response to that Special Commission of Inquiry. So the market's going to take care of some of that. And I remember back when Simon was reporting state politics that those people who back in 2008, 2009 wanted to buy the state's electricity assets were telling me that they were more likely to build power stations in southeast Queensland and Victoria to feed into the grid in New South Wales than build them locally.
Sydney is Australia's biggest city, 4.5 million people. At Federation, 110 years ago, it was the same size as Melbourne. For 100 years, Sydney added more people than Melbourne. But for the last 10, Melbourne has actually closed the gap. Has Sydney lost its mojo?
Hasn't lost its mojo, and you know as well as I do that if you took a decade earlier than the turn of the last century, Melbourne was a bigger city because it had the gold rushes, all those things. So these things are cyclical, but I do think you're right with your basic premise, which is that Sydney has not planned for growth well enough. We're a government that wants to do that. We're also a government that wants to grow our regions. So one of the ways we think we can buy ourselves time as we seek to fix problems in Sydney is to encourage a decentralisation, encourage a stronger growth in regional areas.
Premier Barry O'Farrell, before we let you go, and firstly we appreciate you sticking with us. You were meant to be our headline political guest to start things up, but you can't always predict what's going to be posted on YouTube.
Sex, lies and videotape on the way. So,
one thing I wanted to make sure we asked you, though, was about your political donation reforms. Now, these are significant. These are cutting out corporate and union donations effectively. You got the support of the Greens for this in state parliament. Federally, they're a little bit more divided about this. Would you like to see this become something that gets rolled out across the country, not just in your state of New South Wales? And what's the position of Tony Abbott towards this? You must have spoken to him.
Well, I think the idea that, given that it's only individuals who can vote, that you restrict political donations to individuals is a sensible one. It takes lots of influence, big business and union influence.
You're not worried that the High Court are going to turn around and jump all over this and argue that it's a restraint of political free speech?
No, it doesn't stop people running either political campaigns or issues-based campaigns, but what it says is that, like the right to vote, the right to choose whether or not to donate is restricted to those on the electoral roll. I think that what John Faulkner was talking about a number of years ago federally, before he left the ministry, was precisely the same thing. Too much money washing around politics, too much influence being peddled, too many decisions being bought, which was corroding confidence in the way in which decisions were being made. I know that at a federal level there's an appetite for similar reforms.
On both sides of the parliament?
I think so. I'm not going to verbal either Tony or his colleagues, but I know that we've seen for some time federal Liberal National Party people talking about the same sorts of reforms for the same reasons.
Labor claims that this is really just a disguise for the Liberal Party trying to reduce the influence of trade unions. You've wrapped it up with corporate donations as well so that it doesn't appear that way, but that's their argument.
No, look, it's about trying to provide an equal and level playing field for all, because reforms put in place by Christina Keneally treated, for instance, the Electrical Trades Union as in the same way that it treated the RSPCA. The ETU was affiliated to the Labor Party, at one stage provided the President of the Labor Party, but it was treated under her laws in the same way as the RSPCA. Well, we've said if you're an affiliated body and you spend money to support the party you're affiliated to, that should come under the party's existing spending cap.
All right, New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell, we appreciate you joining us on Australian Agenda. Thanks for your patience and your company.
That's right.
When we come back from the break, Simon Benson and I will wrap up the situation with what's going on with Andrew Wilkie, Kevin Rudd, the YouTube video, it's all there. We'll discuss it after the break.